Welcome to the Walk-Ins Podcast. We are a United Methodist Church located in Louisville, Kentucky. On this podcast, you'll hear a selection of messages, interviews, and more with one of our pastors. If you're ever around the area, please be sure to stop by and say hi, or visit our website at walkinsumc.com. Now, I hope you'll enjoy today's episode. There's an article put out by Carey Nieuwhof earlier this year about the 5 reasons people stopped attending church, especially focusing on millennials. Now, church attendance really began to decline in the late 1940s, where church attendance was at an all-time high of 76%. Can you imagine? That'd be incredible. But the trend accelerated rapidly in the last 2 decades, dropping below 50% for the first time in 2021. And as you look at the statistics, the data says, hey, it's most evident, this decline, in younger generations. And so Nieuwhof cites a Barna survey that lists the 5 specific reasons millennials have stopped attending church. Now, I think these 5 are on point, and I would say this is what has affected millennials. I'm a part of that generation, and Gen Z and younger. And I think these are 5. I think these are also evident in older generations, although I don't think it's as fast or as quickly or maybe even acknowledged as much as it is millennials and younger. But anyways, I think there are 5 reasons. If you would ask an unchurched person outside of our walls, hey, why don't you go to church? One of these at least is on that list. The first one is irrelevance, hypocrisy, and moral failure. And you would say, Rob, you said there's 5, but if you add those, that'd be 8. And sure, but they found that all 3 of those came up as a combination in unchurched people's minds. The church is irrelevant to their daily lives, that the church and people who attend church are full of hypocrites. And if you look at any leadership, any pastor, executive in the local church, hey, there's a lot of moral failure. I mean, a Google search will come up with too much, right? The second one is God is missing in the church. And so this was over every spectrum, from a rock show type church with this, rock bands and a handsome preacher, right, to high church liturgical churches with full organs and choirs and orchestras. They say, hey, I don't experience God in this worship service. God is missing in the church. The third one is legitimate doubt is prohibited. So they didn't see, it didn't seem like to them that they could have honest conversations within the church. That if they asked a question, if they doubted Scripture or God or tradition or history, any of those things, that they felt like it's prohibited. You're not allowed to ask those questions, and even more extreme, that you may be punished for having doubt. The fourth one is they're not learning about God. So maybe they gave church a shot, but they didn't understand anything that was going on or anything that they heard. It's like the church was speaking a foreign language to them. They're not learning about God. And the last one, I think this one is pretty bad. They're not finding community. See, we are suffering from a growing epidemic of loneliness in our country, and folks haven't always found the church as a place of community. But here's what I believe strongly. Nobody should be able to out-community the local church. See, it's a little disheartening to read this list and the statistics, but I also think it's very eye-opening. What didn't make the list is, hey, this church is too loving. that didn't make it. Or they followed Jesus a little bit too closely for me. No, it's quite the opposite, because I think if you turn these reasons on their head, what if the church was the most relevant, transparent, authentic, and full of integrity place out there? And I'll also say, I don't think relevance is just talking the language that younger people do. I mean, I have a TikTok, the church has a TikTok, and our youth make fun of me all the time for having a TikTok. I don't think that's what it means. I think it's relevant to the daily lives that they live. I think it speaks something to what they spend their time doing and thinking about. What if the church was focused on helping people experience God and worship? I would say, I hope that is as a focus, but maybe sometimes we've lost sight of that. I hope the church would allow difficult questions and doubt to enter into the space. This is what I've spent a lot of time focusing on. I think there's a lot of great resources out there to help people ask deep, hard questions, and I think it's okay to be permission giving to these sorts of things. Also, speak about God and theology in accessible ways. What if it allows them to enter into a dialogue, that conversation, that sermon piece became more of a dialogue, and they're able to enter into a conversation about it. And what if the church actually valued community? That in everything we did, it valued community. You see, I think if we look at the words and actions of Jesus, he checked off every one of these boxes. And that's what I also found in this data. It wasn't Jesus who turned millennials and others from the church. I'd widen that even non-Christians would say, hey, the words and the actions of Jesus are actually pretty incredible. But I believe it's the church not being the church that has turned people away. You see, I believe if more Christians followed what Jesus actually said, followed what Jesus actually did, no church would struggle with worship attendance. I don't think any church would struggle with financial giving or engagement. I also believe that the church would be the most powerful force for good in the entire world. I truly believe that. See, when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had left the Sadducees speechless, they met together. Here's a story. And one of them, it says in the Gospels, a legal expert wanted to test Jesus. And he asked him this question, Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And he replied, this is Jesus. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands. See, Jesus is answering these questions in the midst of his final visit to Jerusalem, and he is in it. He's in the midst of the disruptions and entrapments orchestrated by the religious leaders. This is Tuesday of Holy Week, right? And they've been at it for a while. And in each one of these, Jesus is proven to be more clever, more careful, and more inspired than any of his adversaries. But it certainly doesn't stop them from challenging and trying to test Jesus. And so the legal expert of the Pharisees asked Jesus that one last question. Everyone is losing steam. Everyone is tired. It's the last shot and says, what is the greatest commandment out there? And Jesus' answer is quite classic. Love God is the first thing, sure, the most important thing, but it comes with the caveat. To love God means also that you love other people. And it's at this question that they're silenced, they withdraw from the fight. Spoiler, it doesn't last for long. You keep reading. The next day, they're going to hatch a plan to remove this troublemaking prophet and hopefully to permanently silence him for the rest of all time, although that doesn't happen, right? Love God. Love people. That's it. You see, what if that's where we put everything in? What if this is what we focused on above everything else? We may not agree on everything. We may not see eye to eye on everything. But what we do is love God and love people. It becomes a way of life for us. So what does it mean to love God? It seems like a large, ominous thing. We may say we love God as if it's a very passive thing. I'll give you an example. I love coffee. I really do. Anybody that knows me personally knows that I love it. But it's one thing to say I love it to others that I love it. Maybe I have a t-shirt that says I love coffee. I do. It's another thing to make it, to buy it, to drink it each and every day. My love of coffee is very active. It's not passive. And I am emotional about it, although it's more than emotion. It is a full body type of love. You see, if my love for coffee is active, then you may be with me on this. Then my love for God must be just as active. It's not a passive relationship, but an active response to the love of God. In United Methodist theology, the phrase for this is personal holiness. Now, we may have a big problem and issue with the word holiness, but it just means to be set apart. It means to live fully into God has created you to be. It means for me to participate in the means of grace. Practices that deepen our relationship with God. That can look like daily scripture reading. I hope every Christian reads the Bible every day. Every day. No matter if you have time to read a few verses or a whole chapter, I hope you're reading it every day. I hope you're also participating in prayer and meditation. I hope you attend worship. I hope you take Holy Communion with a worshipful community. I hope you faithfully give of your time and your talent to those places as well. You see, my hope is that you're participating in these things all throughout the week. And that throughout your day, you love God not passively, but actively. Whether that be scripture reading, prayer walking in the middle of the day, reading a spiritual book. Well, that may mean personal holiness. There's also, in the same way we can't love God passively, we certainly cannot love our neighbor passively. We can't just say, hey, I love our neighbor, love God, love people. That also makes a really great t-shirt. But it's an active engagement of love. John Wesley called this social holiness. It requires action on our part. It is a loving kindness. It's a state of being continually generous at all matters of our lives. To love our neighbor as we love ourselves is a conscious choice that we act upon. See, that is why my local church community, Watkins, partners with so many different mission partners throughout the state and the world. I mean, it's why last week I had Mark Hogg, my friend Mark, from Waterstep, come and give his conversation. I loved what he talked about because it connected that this is how we actually live out that great commandment to love other people. Even it may seem so small and minute, but it's in a way of actively participating in the mission of God. It's why we collect items for local ministries around here in our children's home. It's why we as a church, we've read books on racial reconciliation and creation care. We do these things to love our neighbor. We do them because Jesus, to sum it all up, it means to love God and to love neighbor, and that's it. John Wesley quotes a passage in Hebrews when he talks about the purpose of the church. It's in his sermon called On Zeal. And he says this, lastly, that is Jesus' followers, the more effectually provoke one another to love. I love that. To provoke one another to love, holy tempers, and good works. Our blessed Lord has united them together in one, the church dispersed all over the world, a little emblem of the church universal we have in every particular Christian congregation. See, the whole purpose of the whole church is to be community, called and centered in life and the mission of Jesus. And what is that? For the purpose of provoking one another to love. That's why it exists, to stir, to incite love. You see, my prayer is that your time in worship provokes you to love, that when you enter a church building, that you be surrounded by these people, sing these songs, pray these prayers, and I hope in all these things it provokes you to love. My hope is that is why you come to church, why you call yourself a Christian, because it is your way of life, your way of being in this world. Love God, love neighbor. Everything else becomes secondary. Grace and peace, my friends.